Hi, how's it going?
Good.
I just got thinking, if you're not going to be here one night, will you just let me know so I can send a different link? Because I think you're the host of this link.
I am the host of this link. Did I say I wouldn't make it one night?
Oh, I don't know. You said you might not make it one time and that I needed to take attendance. So will you be here? So I don't have to worry about that.
I think I wanted you to make sure you took attendance in the event I wasn't. But I think I can make everyone. I might have to leave early or something.
Okay.
But we should be good. Yeah, we should be good.
Okay, beautiful. Let me see if I can get so many things open. Close them.
It's been so crazy busy.
Oh my God, I know. I'm like, I don't know if I'm coming or going, to be honest.
You get yourself involved in so many things.
I know.
So I did move things around. I think hopefully you can do the annual meeting and coming a touch, like I was.
I'll
It
leave
starts at
Milford
4:30.
at 4:30 and then I don't know how long from Milford it would take me, maybe 15-20 minutes max, I think. If that's okay. Or do I need to be there at 4:30?
Now I'm gonna try to do some business kinds of stuff, and so I just moved the schedule around. Coming back from Milford, if you go up, the back roads of Milford.
Yes. I think I can drop myself off on 205 and then head up over the hill over the college, right? I think.
No, well, you wouldn't go on 205. You do that other, back by the Reservoir Road there.
I think so, yes.
And then you end up on East Street.
Yes, okay.
Right?
Yep.
And then it's right off of East Street, and it's a matter of not missing the exit.
I know, and I always do. I
turn.
always miss that sign, and I always have to turn around. For sure.
Yeah, East Street. Yeah, coming right out of Milford, you hang a left out of there.
Yep. Out of the school, yeah, and go out the back road. Yep, over the hill.
Yeah, I can
Without-
do
you
eyes
just
closed,
keep
but I
going
can't tell
over.
you how to do it.
Yeah, no, and my GPS I think might take me too.
Yeah.
If I'm late, I've taken the wrong turn.
Okay.
I'll be there for sure. All right. I thought we have one more person. Let's see here. Did we have one more person?
Let's see. Oh yeah, there's somebody else from Christie's area there.
Sorry. Check my email 1 second. I guess we can get started. I mean, we're just gonna do a couple of things anyway, so we'll get started, and then if they come, we can quickly backtrack or do introductions.
Okay.
I'm gonna try to share my screen tonight. I'm on a computer this time and not the Chromebook, so I'm hoping I better look. Okay, can everyone see the screen tonight?
We can.
Yeah, and you can hear me?
Yes.
And we can
Yay.
hear you. All is well in the world.
Awesome. So excited. I think it's the first thing that's gone right all day, so even better. All right, so our agenda for tonight, let me do my slideshow. We're working through chapter 2 of the book. We're gonna do introductions. I know, Christy, you weren't here last time. So we'll do some introductions real quick again.
I was actually here last time. I just didn't have the book.
Oh, that's right.
And I did get the book, but I didn't have time to read. So I will participate in the chat because my connection at school is terrible. So I will participate in the chat because most of the time I lose my connection. That's why I have to keep my mic and my camera off.
No worries.
But I will participate, and I'll try to do what I can because I did not have time to read the other chapter. I just got the book in my mail today. So
No
I'm
worries.
thank
so
you,
glad you
Erin.
got it.
Yes, thank you so very much.
I understand the last time we did that, it traveled with Stacy around for a while.
Yeah, Cherish said it was like a week or so later, maybe 2.
Oh, no. Well, luckily the
But I
first two
did get it.
chapters go by pretty, I mean, they're pretty easy reading. We're gonna do a couple
Okay,
little
perfect.
review, so, and I think I anticipate, if someone doesn't read, so I think you'll have enough background too with a few things that I'm gonna do, so I think we'll be good. So we're gonna review
Thank you.
we're gonna review a little bit, about gradual release, then we're gonna do, the homework was if you had the opportunity to do a lesson with focused instruction, and if not, it's no big deal. You can still do the task. And of course, we're going to reflect on our conversation afterwards, and then we'll set up us for next time. So we don't need to do this. You're right. Just a quick reminder of meeting norms, which really wasn't an issue last time, but respectful discussions, all opinions and experiences are welcomed. Ask questions, and then we're going to start and end on time. We're all busy. Let's see. So this, I think, is a really great video that when I used to do PD on gradual release, it's a really great video, I think, because it comes from one of the authors, one, and two, I think it kind of hits home on a lot of really good points within the gradual release that maybe we've thought about, maybe we haven't. So maybe as you're watching the video, maybe think of something or write down something that kind of resonated with you. Was there something that kind of stood out for what he says? This is, I think it's about, I think it's like a 6 or 7 minute video, but it's really good.
So now we're going to talk about instruction.
Can you all hear it?
So I'm going to talk about them in
Yes.
an order. It doesn't matter which order we go in. I am concerned that people see our work. Nancy and I drew these in 2001. I think sometimes people see these and think we mean that you must always start with focus, then go guided, then go collaborative, then go independent. You can do them in any order that makes sense on a given day. You can imagine a class starting where it's independent learning first. The kids walk in, they do a journal entry, do now problem, must do, any of those kinds of right now independent work. You could imagine starting a class with collaborative learning. They have to learn something, they do something together. So you can start anywhere. I do believe that all 4 of these components must be present in every lesson every day for learning to occur. I don't think you can skip some on some days. I don't think you can say, well, today we're going to do these 2 and tomorrow we'll do the next 2. I think it creates a whole cycle of learning when you do all 4 of these things each day. So if you take your folds and you look at focused instruction or focused lesson, here's what I think about when I think of focused instruction, that aspect. Number 1, there's a purpose. Number 2, there's teacher modeling. So first, the purpose. I didn't say objective or learning target, although I could have. I said purpose because I want to make sure we also include relevance. Objectives don't have to be relevant or interesting. You know that, right? We've seen really boring objectives that meet the definition of objective. So we say purpose to make sure that we have an objective that is interesting or relevant to the students. For those of you who have administrative jobs, I wish we could change the teacher job description. And I wish it said that part of your job as a teacher was to make your content interesting and relevant to students. I really believe that a huge part of my paycheck comes because I have to figure out, because I'm paid to figure out how to make my content interesting and relevant for students. That's a huge part of my job. So I say purpose rather than objective or learning target so that it reminds me to think about the relevance for the learner. The second part of focused instruction is about teacher modeling, opening up your brain and modeling your thinking, how you solve problems, how you read, how you think about a process, any of those kinds of things, teacher modeling. For me, teacher modeling has, at the very minimum, 2 components. Number 1, it is I statements. It's not we statements and it's not you statements, it's I statements. When I read this, I was thinking about. When I saw that problem, the first thing I thought of was, it's I statements. The second part of teacher modeling for me is about metacognition, thinking about our thinking. At the very minimum, we should have a because or why or how. I can make the following prediction, blah, 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 because the author told me X. So that's for me modeling. So we have a purpose to every lesson, objective, learning target, whatever, a purpose to every lesson, and we model our thinking. For those of you who are in science and things like, some of those more discovery inquiry fields, you don't like that to come first, right? You don't want to give away a lot of stuff up front. So do the modeling later. It doesn't have to start the lesson, but somewhere in a lesson, I believe that students need to hear some expert thinking from their teachers. Because hopefully you know more than the majority of students in your class. And sometimes they need to hear that thinking. So that's focused instruction, purpose and modeling. Guided instruction. One example of guided instruction is close reading, which we talked about this morning. The other way to do it is to prompt and cue and question students. So for us, our definition of guided instruction is the strategic use of questions, prompts, and cues. I'll say that one more time. The strategic use of questions, prompts, and cues. This was a weakness I had as a teacher. I was pretty good at whole class instruction, modeling, setting my purpose, and I'm pretty good at getting groups of students to work collaboratively. And then if I noticed a group was struggling, I would go over to that group and I would re-explain to them what I just told the whole class. Do you hear that I'm doing all the work still? This was hard for me because I know how to listen to them. And when they struggle, I know how to take it back, take over, and give them more information. So I've had to learn to not do that, to not tell the students the information they're missing, but rather ask a question, prompt them, or cue them. It's a little slower, but it's the students doing the cognitive work. So I think there's two ways to do guided instruction if we're in that area. If the students are working in a group, you can, as a teacher, insert yourself into the group and switch it from group work to guided instruction because of your presence. Or you can take students out of different groups and pull them to you for a small group lesson, an extension, a remediation, something like that. So we have two ways of thinking about guided instruction in the small group format. You rotate around, which you're going to see in a video clip in a little bit, or pulling kids from their groups and doing some instruction. So every day, teachers should be working on the errors and misconceptions that students have and trying not to just tell them something, but to prompt and cue them. I think that's fair, don't you? That'd be a reasonable part of school. Every day, we should have students doing collaborative learning. So if you could move to that part of your notes. And for me, collaborative learning is student-to-student interaction. They talk to each other. They interact. They interact in academic ways with academic language. I assume many of you work in schools that have numbers of English learners. And I assume many of your English learners speak Spanish. And do you all speak Spanish? Why don't you speak Spanish? If it were easy to learn a language from listening to a language, you would all be fluent in Spanish, because you all hear Spanish enough. Or pick another language. You hear a lot of languages enough. No one learns language from listening to language. We learn language from producing language. What we have to do is make sure kids spend a large percentage of their day producing language. The language of instruction. So if I'm teaching in academic English, they should be using it. If I'm teaching in Spanish, they should be using it. We have to get students producing the language for them to learn the language. That's the whole point of collaborative learning, is building academic language. And some of you work in schools where there aren't a lot of English learners. But do your students speak the discipline of science or the discipline of mathematics or the discipline of history or the discipline of art? If not, they need to apprentice to that. So we need more time in school with student-to-student interaction. We did a year of professional development all on collaborative learning. And I would be willing to bet that year, at the end of the year, you could have come to any of the 45 schools and talked to just about any teacher. And you would have heard, here's what collaborative learning is, here's why it's important, and here are 3 instructional routines to get kids working. we had amazing increases in levels of knowledge. And then I would also be willing to bet that year that if you went to the classroom of that teacher you were talking to, you would not see collaborative learning. High levels of knowledge, low levels of implementation. So we did another year of PD, and we took people, we asked people to come to the district office for interviews and focus groups. And over and over and over, we said, you know a lot about collaborative learning, you know a lot about interaction. Why isn't it happening at your school? We didn't say personally, you said at your school. The two most common reasons I think are fascinating. Number one, the teachers will almost always say, my principal expects a quiet classroom. So if you are a principal, vice principal, district leader in here, put out a memo. I do not expect a quiet classroom. I also don't expect chaos and cocktail parties, right? I don't know, right? But somewhere in between that, right? In fact, there is an app available for a smartphone from a company. I noticed they weren't here today. But most of the conferences I go to that have administrators present, they sell this app for your smartphone that's a teacher observation tool. The very first thing on the app that the principal has to click on says that the classroom was quiet and orderly. That's not what I'm looking for. In fact, if I checked that, I'd be disappointed. But that app, that classroom observation app for sale for your smartphone, is trying to privilege quiet and orderly classrooms. And for me, there's not enough language going on if that's checked off. The second reason, which I think is the true reason, that the teacher said they didn't use collaborative learning was around their own experience in school. They all would talk about, nearly every teacher in those focus groups and interviews talked about an experience when they were in school where they did group work and they did all the work for the group. So it got me thinking, schools are filled with good boys and girls from school. That's you all, right? Almost all of you in this room were the good boys and girls in school. School worked for you. After all, you decided to spend the rest of your life in school, right? I mean, you're in school all the time. So it worked for you. There are some of your peers who went to school with you who cannot imagine spending one more day. They often have children who go to our school and they can't imagine going back to school. And when you ask for parent involvement, they're like, I am never going to that third grade classroom again. So that's part of our issue around parent involvement. That's another topic. So we had these stories of teachers saying, when I was in blank grade, my teacher did group work and I did all the work for the group. Because grown-ups in school, you all, are the good boys and girls in school. And fast forward 30 years later, you're bitter about that. And you don't want to do to your students what your teachers did to you. Because you did the work and everybody else got the grade. Some of you recognize that, right? You can think back to a specific time in a specific class where you did all the work for the group and the other members got the grade. That happens a lot in college, by the way. The divide and conquer, you do this part, you do this part, you do this part, and two of your members don't do anything, so you have to do it all so you can get the grade to pass because you care about it. So we talked a lot about that in collaborative learning, we better start building some individual accountability. Because if we don't, we end up recreating the things we didn't like about school. So we're going to talk a lot about individual accountability and how to build that into the collaborative learning. Because without it, we are very much at risk of one kid doing all the work and all the talking and no one else doing anything. And that's a waste of time. The last one, independent learning. That's the application of the things we've been teaching students. If I could do this over, I would divide that into two halves. I think there's in-class independent learning and out-of-class independent learning. Overall, as a profession, I think we're pretty good at in-class independent learning. Do you agree with that? Quizzes, bell work, journal writing, do now, those kinds of things. I think we're pretty good at that. I don't think we're very good at out-of-class independent learning, homework. I think we give homework prematurely in the instructional cycle. If I just taught you how to calculate slope, tonight's not a good night for 15 odd-numbered problems on slope. Do you recognize that? So we give kids this homework. We call it instant application homework. I just taught you this, now take it home and do it. So this is my dream, my vision, my hope for what schools would look like. There's a purpose every day. The teachers model every day. Students have time to work together using academic language in the presence of their peers. Teachers notice errors and misconceptions, and they don't tell the kid the information. They use questions, prompts, and cues. And they hold students accountable for that information through a spiral review practice. It doesn't sound too hard, does it? Not a big, long list. It's not brain surgery or rocket science. Here's a list of things that we know work to change achievement. So now we're going to talk about instruction.
Okay, oops. So perfect. So what are
Now
some?
we're going to talk about instruction.
What are some things? I'll stop sharing for a second. What are some things that resonated with you? Every time I clicked on the chat, it stopped. So, anyone have anything that stood out to them?
Christy has a message in the chat.
Yeah, that's what I'm reading now. So we must do all 4 components each day to create a deeper meaning focus. So that is something to remember. We definitely need interesting and relevant content. It helps the kids connect. It all makes it easier. But sometimes it is absolutely. I like modeling. I'm a science teacher. So he was talking when he in that point with the inquiry, right? So we don't want to always give the answers. I hate the group when one person says, "Oh, my daughter did the entire project alone because her group." So let's kind of maybe Chrissy, I think that was a main point, right? Around this idea that we need collaborative learning, but more importantly, we need the individual accountability. So what are some things that you all do with group work to inform individual accountability?
An example that I can give is I do videography with my students, and it's really effective to, assign one person or a couple of people to write the script. Then it's another great idea to have somebody responsible for the camera work, another person responsible for the lighting, another person responsible for the sound. So then that way each party has a specific part of that project that they are responsible for. But ultimately they still have to collaborate because all elements need to come together into a cohesive project. But then that way, if I assign those roles, they don't have to quabble about, well, I wanted to do this or I wanted to do that. They have an assignment that they're working on, and then they can practice something that maybe is a weakness of theirs. And I find that that can be very helpful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's a good point is this project doesn't come together, right? Unless all those parts are done. But could somebody else pick up the pace for somebody else? So where is there like a grade associated with that piece of it? So where does that, what keeps Johnny or Juan from doing one of those other pieces?
I guess I haven't really had an instance where a student just kind of outright refused to do something. That doesn't mean that it's not possible, right?
Right.
I think that I would be willing in that moment to talk to them about what it is that, why are they not willing to do that, and what it is that they were excited about, and maybe discussing how they might be able to discuss with a peer if that peer is willing to switch roles. Maybe that would be a good thing to do, or maybe being able to shed light on why the role that I've assigned them is still an integral part, even if they don't feel like maybe it's as shiny and fun as being behind the camera, for example.
Right. So I like that. So that conversation can be open up. So that assignment of roles maybe can be student led, right? If this is where that student is stronger, does it make sense that they're the ones leading that? Yeah, absolutely. This is something that I remember struggling with a lot too. And I think it kind of mirrors or to think about like balloons, right? So if we're just having recall information, we don't need to have a collaborative task, right? If I'm just recalling what I'm doing, that doesn't require necessarily somebody else. So how do we up the ante with analyzing something, then having the conversation and coming back to it? So a couple of examples, like for example, with argumentative writing, I may have students, I think one of the things that we do with argumentative writing is we teach in black and white, right? But really it's a continuum of viewpoints. So how do we get kids to start having those conversations around it? So they may say, this is where I stand on this topic now, but then once they may read an article or something, they each, so that's individual accountability, right? They each are responsible for reading the articles, saying what the claim is, what it's saying. But now after I do that, I then have to talk to somebody else and get their take on the same article, right? So now we get to decide after we're done with that, then can we have a conversation on where we both stood on this? And then maybe the other individual accountability is after that conversation, we're writing something again. Now, where am I in this, right? I think that's one reason why, as an elementary teacher, I go to write, pair, share a lot. So I ask a question, we then share it, and then I may have them write again. So that's accountability. Christy, did you have something? My lights went off in my classroom. We often do multiple projects, so our first project allows students to establish skills, and we have other projects. I've known teachers to have each member give other members a grade based on a certain rubric. This is tough if you have friends. Yeah, that's a really good point. How do I, especially in those high school years, how do I get kids to honestly do it, right? Ooh, we do critique. I like that. Awesome. What else from this video kind of stood out to anyone else?
Well, I liked how he was very honest about, how teachers are assessed and how that influences how they run their classrooms. Because, I'm in my 5th year of teaching, but I remember, my first, second, third years, I was so concerned about, my class operating in a very specific way when I was being observed because I didn't want to get a poor assessment. And thankfully, I feel a lot more comfortable in my job and also doing my job overall. But it can be very hindering to the teacher themselves if they feel like they're not supported to be able to run a class more effectively by their administrators.
Yeah. And a process that's not supposed to be subjective is oftentimes subjective, right? Even though they have these rubrics, even the language within a rubric sometimes is subjective, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I think that one thing that stood out to me was we have to get students producing language all the time. Like they're the ones that should be doing most of the work, right?
Mm-hmm.
That idea of whoever's doing the work is doing the learning. So if majority of your class, you're lecturing or you're modeling or you're spending most of that time, you're doing the work versus students. So being mindful of that. Erin, was there something in the video that you kind of caught on or thought made you think of differently?
So I just like the comment about how teachers tend to be the people that are successful in schools and then want to emulate what made them successful. And I'm that sticky wicket that I was not really successful in school. And I think that helps me connect with kids who don't necessarily perform well in school.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. How do we maybe open up that career path of education to those students that maybe struggled, and then will those other struggling students then have, more open.
And I sit at the college, at both colleges, where they are very proudly saying that they're teacher applicant have to have a 3.0 average. And I'm going, that's such a shame. Like it's those struggling kids that can be the best teachers sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, and does a grade, talk about subjective, right? That
Yes.
grade, is it or is it aligned to what they're gonna do be as a teacher? And I don't think that's always true, right? And
Right.
especially sometimes, in this lawnmower parent, we're calling it, right? Where parents are advocating for their kids and they all should have A's, like how does that impact what an A really is? And when you earn an A, does it feel as good as if you earn a B trying harder? It's kind of an interesting concept, yeah. All right, awesome. Anyone else have anything else to add? I this is, I like this because it's just going to review. I think it's good to review all the components and then we're going to dive deeper a little bit. So our next task, let me share my screen again. I think we're right here. I just wanted to do a quick, so this section that we read was the focused instruction or the I do it part of the I do, we do, we do together, you do alone. So the purpose again is to introduce a concept, skill, or strategy. And a couple of the things that strategies that he talks about even in this book are they demonstrate, model, or share the teacher thinking. That metacognition is a big piece of it. I think what we have to remember too, that it's brief. This shouldn't be very long. Establishes the purpose. I really love how he calls it the purpose and not the objective or the target. Like that's one of the things in that video that I love. He said, I would make all teachers like the requirement to be relevant, right? How do I make my content relevant? And then teacher carries the cognitive load. So you're in this part, this is your job here is to be the one doing most of the work. And this is a big one, I statements. And I think in this chapter, it hits on it. One of the biggest reasons why is because we're teaching non-expert students to become experts, that expert thinking in the task, because we already know how to do it. And then the teacher notices. So are the students making connections? Am I able to move on yet? Or not? And then some of the strategies I talked about, right, was modeling, direct instruction, demonstration, write alouds, shared reading. So these are all pieces that you can use for this strategy. What I thought it would be important was to look back in the book. I know we haven't gotten there yet, but what did I just do that? Sorry, let me grab my book. On page 143 is the rubric. I know, another rubric, but I love this rubric because it really gets you thinking about, am I creating lessons that have all of these meaningful pieces? So on page 143 is the phase 1 rubric. And I want you to just take a second and rate yourself on the lesson you implemented. It can be the one that you purposely focused on this, or just in general. How am I doing with this part of the rubric or part of the gradual release? How am I doing now? So I'm gonna give you about 3 minutes to say, where are you now? And we'll share in a couple minutes. Set my timer. Okay. What are, when looking at the, does anyone need more time?
Nope.
Okay, perfect. What are some areas of strength that you feel that your lessons have when it comes to focused instruction? What are you doing well based off this rubric?
So for me personally, I feel that I have strength in quality indicator number 1. So lesson contains content, language, and social purposes that is based on formative assessment. I think that, yeah, I think that my content language is right on. And I think that that's a skill of mine, and formative assessment is my primary form of assessment. But I do think that sometimes I get lost in giving information and not always, making sure that it's always landing and that the students are keeping up with the language that I'm using.
Yeah, and especially the language that you have is very industry driven, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's very specific. Yeah. Christy, what's an area? Oops, you're in the chat. Sorry. Let me see. Content language, you too. So you also have, that's especially in the sciences, right? Some kids can explain, some kind of can, some can't. Got to work on quality indicator too a little. What do you think it makes the quality to indicator 2 the hardest? Which part of that is probably the hardest to teach, and why?
I think personally, one of the things that I was just discussing this course with a friend of mine, that something that happens in schools a lot is that, students are taught to do, but not necessarily learn, which I thought was really interesting. And so I think sometimes we, especially me, when I get to like the juniors and seniors get to me, they have a very specific way that they approach their learning, right? And it's come through years and years and years of being in school. And so they're not necessarily invested. They're just trying to get to that end point. They're just trying to do the work to get the grade. And so I'm not saying that the student is at fault, but this is just an observation that I'm making, is that sometimes it can be hard to then undo that, right? Undoing something that's been learned over a course of many years can take a lot of time. And so some students are not always deeply connected to the content.
Right. So, which is interesting because your students have a different layer, right? They've chosen to be in this program. So that's interesting to me that that motivation may not always be high. So that's interesting. Why, even though I showed them, I can't remember. And I think that's important too, right? Because they know the relevance, or are we telling them? I think that's a good point too. You don't pronounce your name Andy, right? It's Andy.
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm saying it right. That students need to, I think, so sorry, totally lost my thought. On the idea that students really need to be responsible, right? So how do we have students that we say we teach them, right? But have they learned it? They're just doing. But how are we holding them accountable for the what, the how, and the why of the lesson? What are we doing to ensure that they even know? We may think because we've said that we told them the relevance or why they need to learn it, but do they, or how have they internalized that? To, I think, go back to your point of motivation. How does that internalize them to make it relevant and motivate? Erin, what's something that you are doing well or not well?
Well, It depends. I did a program today and I'm realizing I didn't do a very good job of containing with the language and the social purpose and all that stuff. But it is a little different because, you know, I'm walking in cold to a classroom or a group. But I think the hardest thing is the second one. The students can explain purpose in their own words.
Yeah, so we can say it, but can they do it?
Yeah.
What are some ways that you think, or that maybe within the chapter that you read, that you thought about, like, what are some ways to make sure students are being held accountable for that piece of it?
So quite often I think that comes down to the summative assessment, which I know isn't something that we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
But that review process, the grading process, the reflection process is such an important way of kind of assessing how students are doing. And if they are using that. So for example, one of the lessons that I was thinking about through this chapter was the introduction of the artistic process, which is just a formula for breaking down an art piece into steps to develop it versus just sitting down and cracking out a piece in one sitting. Which is how most people are used to doing their art. They're not necessarily used to breaking it down into steps. And one of the ways that I hold my kids accountable is that in addition to handing in the fully finalized, realized piece, is that they also have to turn in each step of the process so that I can see that they are following through and they're making sure that they're doing each of those steps.
Do you add like a reflective piece to it too about each step, or is it just the step that you're looking for?
It's just evidence of the step. Because each of the steps are in a sense reflective of themselves. So for example, the first step is to do thumbnail sketches. So I always expect my students to do a minimum of 3 thumbnail sketches. So the whole point is to avoid just going with the first idea that sticks into their head and giving themselves options. So they have to be reflective. They have to be thinking about what are other ways that I could solve this problem. And so through each of those steps, I'm giving them chances to explore different options and solutions.
Okay, like, no, I love that. So the authentic modeling, so before they're doing each one of those steps, are you doing that third indicator, which is the actual modeling or demonstrating of that piece and using those I can statements?
So that's the interesting part, because I did know in reading through the chapter that that was an area that I could improve on. And I had kind of graded myself. So I gave myself a 3, a 2, and a 2.
Okay.
And so when I wrote this kind of updated lesson plan for how I would introduce this topic, you know, I made a point to say, okay, well, I know that I've brought in work that I've done in the past, but I use it to show my kids this is work that I've done, but not necessarily as a teaching tool specifically. But I can use that very easily for the artistic process because I have instances of each of those steps that I can show them and say, here I did multiple thumbnail sketches for this one illustration that I ended up doing because I realized that I didn't like the composition in this one and I needed to make this bigger or I needed to push this back. And so that's something that I wrote in specifically that I want to make sure that I do because I really love the concept of talk throughs and I realize that I don't utilize them as often as I should.
Yeah, and especially as the expert, right? I think that your field, what most field lend ourselves really well to this, but it is kind of weird at first when you're those I can statements. I know when I first started playing around with this, especially when you know so much about your topic, right? Like, how do I hone in on exactly what they need and not go off all these tangents that my brain may go off because I know so much, but what is it they need to know? Like, really be concise with that. I know that's something that I struggled with and still do at times. Yeah. Christy, are you really good at the I can statements, or not the I can statements, the I statements as you're doing that metacognitive process? So maybe just thinking about it. Fair enough. Not as good as I want to be, for sure. Awesome. What about you, Erin? Do you think you, maybe as a teacher or as you're doing professional development, how that is translating?
Yeah, that's, I was just gonna say, I think I need to practice a lot more. I'm definitely not as good as I should be, and it just requires practice and mindfulness, I think, to be focused on that.
Yeah, but I think it also goes back to the idea of assessment. This is all linked to an assessment, right? So I think that can help. In your case, what is the assessment? Is it how well you're doing as a professional developer provider, or where is it that where you're trying to get better at, right? So I think, yeah, I think that's a huge piece of this. All right. Any other thoughts or questions about this rubric? I think it kind of takes, because I feel, I remember like reading the chapter, and then once I saw this rubric, I think it highlighted some of the things that I may have missed as I was reading.
I would say I think rubrics are so fascinating, because if my superior is coming in and I need to defend my practice, I can find ways that I'm proficient at all of these.
Oh,
But
yeah.
if I'm looking to say I really want to improve my craft, I'm way down at the bottom.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's important too, right? When we're having our students critique themselves and stuff, that is important that they do that self-assessment. Where if I were to grade my own paper, where would I? Am I okay with this part of where I need to be? If not, how am I getting higher on that continuum of points in this case, or for the grade? And it's okay that you're starting at a 1, right? And that idea of how do I get better? How do I work through?
And I think that's what I was just gonna say. It's not really about a grade, right? Like, if I want it to be about a grade, then I'm gonna pretend that I'm in this proficient category, even when I'm not. But when it's
Right.
really about improvement, I'm gonna be super honest with myself and make sure that I'm really hitting those target goals the way they're expecting me to. And it's just for my own growth.
And I was interested because this is his 3rd edition, but in it, he did work with Hattie. He does have some references to work with Hattie, but in Hattie's work, he talks about the #1 thing that increases student academic growth is that students self-evaluate. So the idea that is, all right, I'm going to show this, I'm going to tell you what we're going to learn today, I'm going to tell you all these relevant things, but where am I? Where am I starting this lesson? Am I at a 1 where I don't have a clue what you're talking about? I don't even know what language you're using. Or is it a 5 where I can teach somebody? How do I use that? And then say, okay, if I'm at a 1, now I need to be self-reflective. And I think that might be a way to hold accountability to #2, right? On our, in the rubric here, the indicator. Where do I stand in this? And what do I have to do now to increase that number? Or hold strong. If I'm 5 and I'm really good, now what is my responsibility as a learner? If I already think I know everything, am I going to be able to still grow? So I think that's also an interesting conversation to have with students. But that is the #1. So I think an average year student is a 0.4. But I think it's over like 3 years growth or something, if you have students do that every day in all lessons. So it's pretty fascinating. Okay. Oops, I think I need to. Oops, we're gonna share. Did anyone want, I know that for homework, I said that as you were reading, to come up with any questions, were there, maybe everyone can share a question or one question that you had as you were reading?
Sure. So all of my questions, I think, are really pretty related. But ultimately, I think my question always is we know that we're always going to have a diverse group of learners. And I think like, Christy's comment earlier really spoke to that, is that some kids can be really on top of it. And they're like, I know exactly what I'm doing. I can explain myself. I know the goals, all of that. But you know that there's going to be a range. And so, my question always is how can I be more efficient, or how can I make this process the most efficient given the fact that I have such diverse learners?
Mm. What were some of your initial thoughts on that?
On it in just general?
Yeah, like what is your intuition? What are you thinking, like, as a response? What's your solution? Have you come up with any solutions to that?
I'm not sure. I think one of the frustrations that sometimes we can have in CTE in particular is that we might feel as though we have to spoon feed our students a lot. And that can be frustrating because, we are trying to work with our students in that professional capacity, right? And trying to get them ready for the workspace. And we often sometimes feel like we have to backtrack a lot in order to get them to a place where they can engage with that work space ready mentality and those skills. And it does have to do with student skill level, but obviously I want to make sure that all of the students who come into my classroom truly feel confident in what it is that I'm trying to teach them. So I think that using more group instruction is really, or the group where the students are interacting together will be more helpful, because like I said earlier on, I don't do a whole lot of that out of fear of chaos. But I'm also constantly assessing how I think I'm doing, and how students are performing, how I can try and address things as I see them.
No, that's perfect. And I actually, Fisher and Fry has this amazing resource. I'll add it to our folder. And I think it's how to get kids to work in groups in like 20 days or something, and what to do each day. And ultimately to not have that chaos, or what did he say? Cocktail hour in the classroom. So I'll add that to it. To our folder. Awesome. Chrissy, did you have a question, or Aaron? Oh, that's right. And Chrissy, you haven't had the book yet, so no worries. You get a free pass today.
I'm not sure if I had a question. I would had a comment, I think. I think unless I am just misunderstanding the world, but I think direct instruction has different connotations for different subject areas. And I think, and maybe I'm wrong, but by special ed training, direct instruction was very didactic. So when they say it's not this, that's not my understanding of direct instruction.
Right. And I feel like he gives a lot of it in this. Like, I feel like he gave quite a few examples of, because it sounds like they aren't very clear, or per se. There's different ways to do the direct instruction. Right. So I think he gives the read this over the weekend. Now I'm okay. So I'm sorry, Aaron, can you just clarify, like, so are you saying that you don't think you agree with that statement, or you didn't agree with that statement? It was didactic.
My understanding of direct instruction was that it was didactic and very scripted. So I'm not sure if it's a differentiation in what we're taught as special ed, or whether I just have a misconception.
Well, and I know their first round of this, like, because I've read their other editions, they were very adamant that the kids really should just be watching you. But I think I think that's sometimes hard, right? And especially if you're doing something that they have some background knowledge on, sometimes they want to participate, right? So maybe you're doing a multiplication, maybe they've only been doing 2 digits by 1 digit, but now they're going to go in and do 3 digits by 2 digits. And they can help you with those multiplications, right? They know what 3 times 2 is. They can say that, so they can help in that situation. I think that's where it becomes a little not just the teacher centered. And they're doing all the work.
Well, he just defines the direct instruction differently than I had.
Yeah,
understood.
no, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. And I
Yeah.
think that has evolved, I feel like, with his work, with his and her work. I know we're giving him credit, but it's Nancy as well. That part has evolved a little bit, because it used to, in the previous ones, it was just the teacher. The teacher's doing all the work. For sure.
I am not, I come into this because I'm a teacher. I'm not a developer, a curriculum
Yeah.
developer or anything. So I was kind of thrown by the statement here. It says, as reported by the Visible Learning Database, I'm on page 33. The
Yep.
effective size of direct instruction is 0.59, well above the 0.40 effect size. What does that mean?
So the effect size is, it's with certainty of how, so the 0.4, what he's referring to is an average year's growth. A student, pretty much, as long as the teacher's teaching, that they will make an average year's growth. An average year's growth is a 0.4. So what this 0.59 is saying is this strategy alone is going to get your students to have growth that is more than a year.
Okay, so I can't do the math.
Yeah, so it's 10, so it's a 1.10
Yeah,
over 20. Yeah, it's about the
19%.
it's another couple months in growth, essentially. So it's 1.2 or whatever it is.
Huh.
1 year, 2 months growth by doing that. Where when I was, and that's where I was talking about Hattie's effect size to around the idea of students rating themselves. So I wish, because he'd worked with them and they even have a book, I was surprised that in his updated version that they didn't add something about students in this section self-evaluating before they get started, right? So this is what we're going to do, why we're going to do it, and how we're going to do it. But where are you on this continuum
Yeah.
of learning?
Special ed, we did a lot of self-evaluational work.
Yeah. Okay, so let me just real quick, because we have like about 2 minutes. Oops, am I sharing? I'm sharing my screen. So we're going to read chapter 3 for next time. We're going to write down or highlight 3 quotes that resonate with you as you're reading. And then you're going to test drive again. So you're going to pre-plan some question cues and prompts to help students answer a question in your class. And then you're going to try to implement them and be prepared to share how it went. Any other questions? Any wish lists for next week that you want us to do more of? Less of? Is this formatting working for everybody?
This is fine.
Okay.
It's just fine.
I am willing to be flexible and change things up. So want to make sure. All right, awesome. Thank you so much. We won't see each other next week, but we will continue. I believe it's the 9th, right? Yes, it's on the 9th. So we'll see everyone on the 9th. So hopefully you'll have lots of time and opportunity. And feel free to combine the focused instruction with the next section. So of the guided instruction. So if you now want to try to put both of those pieces together, because we do have a couple of weeks, I definitely would encourage that.
So we may see everybody next week anyway. Jennifer will be presenting to us at the Teacher Center's annual meeting. And how do I say your name? Andy?
It's Andy.
Andy, okay, and Andy is going to be joining our board, so you're very welcome to join us for that meeting, Andy. I hope you got my email.
I did. Thank you very much.
Awesome. We'll see you
Right, so
then.
then I'll see everybody next week then, next Tuesday.
All but Christy.
Oh, Christy. Christy's not. Erin hasn't convinced you to do that yet, Christy.
Well, she said in Horsehead, so that's good.
Oh, that's far. Yeah. That is a little far. All right. Thank you so much.
All right,
Thank
bye-bye.
Good night.